I believe that the Renters Reform Act is an absolute joke. So much so that I believe it should actually be renamed the 2023 Parliamentary Declaration of Incompetence in all matters pertaining to property, because it has had catastrophic consequences in the private rental sector. Landlords have been hounded out of the market with changes to tax, the threat of being forced to upgrade their properties to a minimum EPC of a C in 2025, which, after so many landlords have sold, in their wisdom a couple of weeks ago, they shelved it indefinitely. As for the Renters Reform Act, it's been put before Parliament. It's now been put back to the end of the year. Who knows if or when it will actually be implemented, but it has caused catastrophic damage and it's not even set in law yet. As I see it, it should be about improving conditions for both sides in what actually is a housing partnership, because tenants need landlords and landlords need tenants. And despite the media rhetoric, the vast majority of private landlords obey the law and do their absolute best, as do the vast majority of private tenants. In fact, over the last few years, those who have fallen foul of the law, dangerously so, time after time, have actually been institutional investors and housing associations, not private landlords. And yet it's private landlords who are being pushed out, and more tenants or potential tenants as a result are struggling to find somewhere to rent. Twisting the arm of a private landlord to sell their property does not mean that that potential tenant will buy that property. Perhaps they are not in a position to buy. Perhaps they do not want to buy in that location or at this time, or they don't know what they want to do in the future, or maybe interest rates are too high. Perhaps they just want to rent so that they have their options open, but there's less and less property available to rent on assured short hold tenancies, and if this comes in, there will be very little available on assured short hold tenancies, because the government is interfering where it shouldn't interfere. Rather than be focusing on the safety of housing, the quality of housing, and to ensure that there is an efficient and swift process to deal with any problems, they are going to tie up the courts, or whatever they choose to call their legal process, in red tape that will only make matters much worse. With regards to the Renters Reform Bill itself, I have written an article detailing a summary of basically what it covers, which I'll post the link to. But in short, obviously, the Section 21 is going to be abolished, and all existing and new tenancies will then be periodic tenancies. But what does that mean? It basically means that, should this pass, a tenant can move into a property, and on the day they get the keys, they will be legally entitled to give 2 months notice, even though it's cost the landlord a lot of time and effort and money to get that property rented, thinking that they're going to be receiving a rent for the next year or two. But the tenant will be legally allowed to give 2 months notice, and at the end of the 2 months, the tenant's got themselves two months rent in a property where otherwise they would have had to pay for short-term accommodation that would have been 3 or 4 times the price. The Section 21 will be replaced with grounds for possession. With regards to rent arrears, in those grounds are if the tenant falls behind for 2 months or more, 3 times in 3 years, that will be grounds for possession. But it doesn't cover if a tenant is 5 months in arrears in year 1. What do the landlords do then? If the landlord wishes to move in or if the landlord is selling. But there is no provision here to cover the thousands of accidental landlords who are people who need to rent their property for a fixed term because they need to move with their job, for example, be it 6 months or a year or 2 years. There should be a fast track method for those people to be able to recover their homes. And it could be conditional that that fast track option would only be available to you if you were living in the property immediately prior to renting it for at least 6 months or a year or 18 months, whatever, at least to cover that element, because that will cause serious problems for people who need to move with their job and perhaps cannot or do not want to sell their home. The other grounds are mortgage repossession. Of course, God forbid that we forget to cover the banks. A superior lease ending. Now that's the gremlin, which I'll get back to in a moment. If the property is being sold under rent to buy, if it's being sold or changing hands, if it was previously student accommodation and it is currently being used as student accommodation in order to ensure that the property can be available for further students, although I've yet to see what the full details of that will be. Landlords will not be able to unreasonably refuse pets, although there's no provision for, say, carpets and soft furnishings. What will happen with carpets, for example? It's quite a sum to replace if a tenant's only been there for a few months or for as little as 2 months. What will landlords do? Maybe rent properties out without carpets and say, well, you're welcome to have a pet, but you have to buy carpets, and when you go, you can take them, and the mess your pet's left with you. Because if you were renting a property and you had a toddler, would you want your toddler crawling around on a carpet that was previously subjected to God knows what by God knows whose pet? I don't think I would. There's going to be an ombudsman. And guess who's going to pay for him or her or them? The landlord, of course, but the ombudsman is there to fight for the tenants against the landlords. There's also going to be a property portal paid for, by the landlords, but that property portal will be there so that you can be rated by tenants, and you will have feedback about you available to tenants in public. That's nice, isn't it? One of the most important elements of any changes or legislation where housing is concerned is the quality of that housing, something called the Decent Homes Standards. That's something that should have been worked towards incrementally over years. I mean, as I said, this has been in place since 1988, and they haven't done anything to prevent people living in absolute squalor. But this one, the really important one, guess what? To be announced. They haven't even decided, or they don't know what they're going to do about it. And you will be banned from unreasonably refusing children or people on benefit. Who was it that exacerbated the problem of renting to people on benefit? It was the government, when they decided in their wisdom that they would pay housing benefit direct to tenants instead of paying it to the landlords. So people who are already struggling and may find the temptation of dipping into their rent irresistible, and often do so and get themselves into more trouble, meaning that landlords gradually decided to shy away from housing benefits, people on housing benefits, not to mention the fact that local authorities, cynically in their wisdom, when a landlord wanted to recover their property and pursued an order to possess their property, that the local authorities would say to people that if you leave that property without being evicted, then we will not help you. Perhaps it is the councils who need to be addressed. These arrogant morons who are voted in, and because nobody knows who they are, what they do, or even why they are there, they get away with even more nonsense than the politicians themselves. ULEZ, 15-minute cities, to name a few. So yes, I think this is just absolute and utter rubbish. I think that there is so much more that could have been done in a much better way. But unfortunately, these people are like a moron with a hammer who sees the solution to every problem as a nail. That's basically the be all and end all of it. I will put a link to the full article if you want to read it in my summary. And if you have any questions about anything to do with property, as always, feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time, and bye bye for now.